Hey, everybody. Welcome once again to the Winning Digital Customers Livecast. Today, we are going to do part 2 of our series on 20 things going away in the next 20 years. And for those that missed the last livecast, just a quick tee up. What we're doing here is we talked about the fact that we have all kinds of great new things in our lives now. The technology has brought us, whether it's smartphones or Alexas, drones, virtual reality, all kinds of things. And at the same time, technology often obsoletes prior generations of technology. Most of us are not using Kodak film anymore. Most of us are not using our Blackberries. Most of us don't have 8-track tapes or stereo systems in our homes. So what we're looking at here are 20 things that I predict will be gone, essentially out of our lives, like the way that today the VHS tape and the Rolodex are no longer part of daily life, unless you're a tiny, tiny percentage of people who are sticking on to the old way. What are the things that are going that way over the next 20 years, things that are part of our lives today that are going away? Last time we talked about the first 10 on my list, things like fax machines, standing in line, and today we're going to do the second half of the list. So thank you for all of your feedback on the first 10, and today we're going to dive right in. Not a lot of prefacing like we did last time. If you want more insight or information about the tee up to this, you can watch the prior live cast, which was about the first 10 of the things that are going away in the next 20 years. But for those that are picking this up as part 2, I don't want to bore you with a recap too much. We're going to go right into the last of the, number 11 to number 20 things that will be going away in the next 20 years. So number 11, we're on number 11 here since we're doing the second half, business cards. And just like last time, for each of these, I'm going to give you my percentage prediction, which is you could look at it two ways. You could either say, how likely is it that these are going away, or how much are they going away? And I'm going to say business cards will be 80% gone or more by 20 years from now. The idea of handing someone a piece of paper with your contact information on it. There's studies that show that the decline of business cards has been substantial, going all the way back down to the 1990s, but particularly recently, because of course, and very recently, of course, due to COVID, right? Because we're not all getting out so much. We're not in that personal interaction to hand someone a business card. And of course, the e-card, sending someone your ICS file, your information by email or by text so that they can add it to their phone address book, is just so much more convenient because they don't have to retype anything. They don't have to scan anything. You're sending them their information electronically. Yet there's still, I certainly wouldn't argue that today, as of this moment, the business card is gone. Plenty of people still keep business cards in their wallets, but I would say 20 years from now, that will no longer be occurring. And by the way, in addition to simply the ability to email someone or text somebody your contact information from your phone, I think we may also see the rise of these NFC-based business cards. So I have one of these, and I don't have a lot of chance to use it during COVID, of course, but these work more or less the same way tap to pay works if you have a recent credit card where you simply walk up to a terminal, you tap it, and it transfers to the terminal the information about your account so it can charge your card. This works the same way with your personal information. If you take an NFC business card, and very often these are made of metal or some other very, very thick plastic, you only need one of them. You don't give it to somebody. You simply tap it on their phone, or you hand it to them and they tap it on their phone. And the next thing that comes up on their phone is essentially your contact information. They can say add to contacts, and boom, you're done. And they hand you the card back, or maybe you just tapped it to their phone. So this is another example of creating, essentially an electronic business card. So between that and the ability to potentially just do this with two phones, sending contact information between phones, I predict at least 80% of all business card use will be gone by 2020. And as I said last time, who cares, right? What difference does it make? Well, it depends on your business. If you're in the printing business, that could be important to know. If you're in the business card holder business, that could be important to know. And if you're a user of business cards, being mindful of the fact that this trend is occurring gives you the opportunity to think about where you want to be on that trend. I think everybody needs to be thinking all the time about what's changing. How is the world changing? Wayne Gretzky said famously, the reason he was such a successful hockey player is he didn't skate to where the puck is. He skates to where the puck is going. So sometimes easier said than done. But what I'm trying to do here is give you some insights based on our research as to where we think the puck is going on a variety of different things. And of course, you can determine whether that puck is important for you to be thinking about depending on what your particular business is. So let's look at another one, restaurant menus. So I'm going to suggest that 70% of all restaurant menus will be gone within 20 years, meaning printed menus, physical menus of some sort or another, replaced, as is in the case with most of these 20 things, by a digital equivalent. Of course, we've seen a tremendous amount of this during COVID already, when there was an awareness that the physical restaurant menu might be something that would transmit virus or germs or other things. And so many restaurants got rid of their physical menus and replaced them with QR codes on the table. You scan the QR code, you see the menu on your phone. And there's so many reasons why this is beneficial. There may be some very high-end restaurants that 20 years from now want to continue to give you a physical menu. And, that'll be even cooler because it'll be special, right? It'll be something you only experience at the fanciest and highest ends of restaurants. But if you go to a TGI Fridays 20 years from now, and certainly if you go to, obviously quick serve restaurants generally don't have physical menus anyway. You go to a local diner, I think it's a very high probability that everybody will move to this model where you scan a QR code. And of course, that has so many benefits, not only for the presentment of the menu, and you can sort and filter the menu. You can say, only show me the things that are gluten-free. And by the way, some of the restaurant menu presentment we see today digitally is very primitive. You scan a QR code and up comes a PDF of a menu, and you still have a server come over and ask you what you want. And you're sitting there trying to scroll and zoom in and zoom out of a PDF on your phone. But it can be so much better than that. And certainly there are restaurants that are way beyond that, where you scan a QR code, it brings up a menu, you can filter and sort just like you would on eBay. You can search for something. You can say, as I said earlier, only show me vegetarian entrees or gluten-free items or low-calorie items or whatever you care about. And then you can see a photo of every single dish. I always like to see a picture of what I'm ordering, and sometimes you go to a menu at a restaurant and some items have pictures, but some don't, So you can see pictures of everything. You can, and of course, look at nutritional information or other things that you may or may not want to look at. And then potentially simply order right there from your phone. So you don't have to wait for a server to come over if you want to order an extra appetizer or another drink. So the benefits of digital menus in restaurants are enormous. And the barrier to them is near zero, knowing that almost everybody in that restaurant is going to be carrying a smartphone. So I strongly predict that most restaurants, the only reason it's only 70% here is because, like I said, I think there'll be some high-end restaurants that hold out, but everybody else I think will be going to digital menus. And some of this is going to happen, of course. I gave myself a little bit of cushion when I said the next 20 years. I think a lot of the things that I'm talking about here will be happening much sooner, perhaps in the next 10 years. And this is, of course, a trend that's already happening, but not necessarily the majority of restaurants. I think we're going to see this be the majority of restaurants within 5 years and nearly all restaurants within 20 years. Okay. And of course, here's just an example of what those cool restaurant menus look like, where you can actually go in and order right from your phone. Okay. Next, the parental permission slip. This is a big one for me because I have 5 kids, as many of you know. 2 oldest are in college. My youngest is now just starting 3rd grade. So as you can imagine, I've had to sign many a permission slip and include the check or include the $10 bill or whatever with the permission slip. And even over the last few years, I've seen this declining in my own experience with my kids in public school in favor of some kind of electronic permission slip, something that comes to you digitally. Most schools in the United States today are using some kind of a parent portal that you can log into on your phone or your computer to see your kids' grades and look at their homework assignments. And the old-fashioned parental permission slip, yes, my child can go to the Museum of Natural History on August 3rd or whatever, is finally going away in favor of the kids screaming at you as they run for the bus, I forgot to have you sign my permission slip, in favor of something that's more DocuSign-like, where you get something from the school, you say, yes, it's okay, and move on. So I think that is a highly likely change, as much sooner probably than the next 20 years. Within the 20-year period, I'm putting this at 100% likelihood. I don't think there's going to be any written permission slips 20 years from now. Okay. In the same vein, filling out medical forms when you go to the doctor. This is something that I feel is a high pain point of the medical experience today. And it is true that still today, most medical practices that I go to, thankfully I'm reasonably healthy, I don't go to the doctor that often, but still do this. They ask me to fill out forms, and inevitably it's a bunch of Xerox forms. Sometimes there's Xeroxes of Xeroxes of Xeroxes. Very often, every one of them asks me for my name and my address. So not only am I having to put all this information, like my medical history, whether I'm allergic to any drugs, all these things, and writing it all down, but I'm having to write some of the information over and over and over because it's being asked for in every form. Very old-fashioned, sort of unappealing experience to people living in a digital world, for people living a digital lifestyle. Recently, actually, I had a shoulder injury, and I really got to experience the pain because I went to an orthopedist that made me sit there and fill out these forms over and over and over, and every word that I wrote was hurting my shoulder, and I still had to sit there and write my name and address and social security number on 5 different forms. That has got to go. And it is going. A huge percentage of medical practices have adopted electronic health records. In fact, according to one study by Health IT, in 2017, 9 in 10 offices had adopted some form of electronic health record. Of course, just because the office keeps an electronic health record doesn't mean that they're not still asking you to fill out a paper form. But it means then that they have somebody who has to type all that information into their electronic health records. In contrast, I was at another doctor's not too long ago where you walk in and they hand you a tablet, or they give you a QR code. You can choose. You can either use their tablet or you can scan a QR code. And it asks you all the same questions that they need to ask medically about your medical history, your parents' history with cancer or whatnot. But it's all done on a tablet, which means, number one, it's easier for you. You don't have to fill it out in writing. It doesn't have to ask you the same questions over and over. And of course, nobody has to re-enter the information, which is just extra cost and effort and an opportunity for error. So this seems to me to be the way of the future. Again, I see very little barrier to implementing this other than the speed of resistance to change, the speed of adoption of medical practices. But certainly over the next 20 years, I think we're going to see this at near 100% penetration. The next, newspapers, printed newspapers. I know this is one people are often sad about, but my prediction is that by 20 years from now, we will see at least a 70% decline in the physical newspaper business. And I'm sure that will mean a reduction in the number of printed newspapers, the number of subscriptions, the amount of advertising revenue. But let's just look at a few stats to support something which, there's no question that printed newspapers are still here. Plenty of people still get a printed newspaper. But let's just look at the trends. So this is a trend which shows the circulation of daily newspapers, which reached a peak around 1990 at around 60 million. This is U.S. circulation of all the daily newspapers in the United States. This is from a newspaper consortium that gathers data for the whole industry. You can see that that's fallen by 2/3. In 2020, that number was something like 20 million. And actually, that's a pre-COVID number. So I can only assume, while I don't have fresher data on this, that number significantly dropped further as people adopted more digital ways of getting news and information and didn't necessarily go to the newsstand or buy newspapers. They may still have had newspapers delivered to them, of course, so I'm sure it didn't go to zero, but this trend line you can see is clearly falling. And of course, the associated with the reduction in subscriptions is the reduction in revenue. This is the total revenue of newspapers. You can see here that the revenue is sort of fallen off a cliff here. And this is an interesting chart that actually not only relates to newspapers, but all forms of print advertising. And it's a little hard to see, but if you look at the second line down on the left, the one that says print, the blue line, you can see how it's a little confusing because it crosses the green line there. You can see how around 2000, that number starts to fall off a cliff from being, something like a little more than 0.5% of GDP. That's what this particular chart is using as its baseline. What percent of GDP? All advertising is hovering between, 1.25% of GDP. At one time, print advertising was nearly half of that, nearly half of all advertising. And today, it looks like it's down to something like 0.2%. So it's fallen by more than half. Substantially more than half. So clearly there's a lot of stats that show us that the newspaper business as a print medium is in substantial decline, and I see no reason to think that that's going to turn around. Hopefully, news organizations have adapted themselves to delivering news in more digital formats. So I'm not necessarily suggesting the demise of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or any other news organization. What these companies have been doing and need to continue to do is digital transformation so that the print product is no longer the core of what they offer. And of course, many of them are doing that in very significant ways. And for example, in 2020, the New York Times reported a 50% increase in digital-only subscribers. So there's a huge focus on getting more people to be subscribing to newspapers and gathering news digitally so they have a way of being able to do the important work they continue to do. But I do predict, highly likely, the elimination of the print newspaper as part of daily life. And of course, it's being replaced by all kinds of great ways of getting news digitally, whether that's going directly to a source like the New York Times website or New York Times app, or going to news aggregators like Apple News, who gather news articles from all kinds of different places. Okay, we're up to number 16 on our list of the top 20. Bills, paper bills. You can see there's a trend in this second half, right? A lot of it's about elimination of things that are on paper. And by the way, that also has potentially an environmental benefit as well. I did a whole other live cast on the environmental benefits of digital transformation. But I don't think that's the main reason we're seeing this happen. I think it's so much more about convenience and cost. So I think my prediction is that by 20 years from now, there's a 70% chance likelihood, or that 70% of all existing paper bills will be eliminated in favor of some form of electronic bill presentment. Already, about 56% of all bills in the United States are paid online. Less than half of bills are even still paid the traditional way. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean there's not a physical bill being sent today. A lot of what happens today is, this is what happens in my house. We get a lot of bills in the mail, we open them up, and then we go online and we pay them. But I think what we're going to see in the next 20 years is the second half of that. Not only is the payment going to be electronic, but the presentment of the bill is also going to be electronic. The estimation from one source, the EBPP, which is an electronic bill payment consortium, is that electronic bill payment percentage is estimated to grow around 8% a year. So we're going to continue to see more and more and more bills that are being paid electronically, probably approaching 100% as we get to this 20-year mark, and quite possibly even sooner. If you really continue to grow at 8%, that's going to be only 5 or 6 years before it's near 100%. And it's only logical that electronic presentment of bills go hand in hand with that. And new services, or at least newly popular services like Venmo, that include in them the ability to send someone a bill and easily, quickly pay it with one tap, rather than have to take a paper bill and sort of enter the information on your banking site or find that payer and pay it. It's just going to make that easier and easier. And of course, companies spend money every year on sending out all these paper bills, on printing them, on mailing them, et cetera. So on processing the results when they come back as checks. So a lot of cost to be saved, a lot of effort on the part of people paying bills to be saved. This is only logical that within the next 20 years, we're highly likely to see the elimination of paper bills in favor of electronic presentment, as well as electronic bill payment. All right, let's move on. We're on number 17 already. Number 17 is identification cards, whether that's your passport, your driver's license, your insurance card, your health insurance card, all of these kinds of things. I'm predicting 80% of this will be gone within 20 years, probably sooner. Did you know that 120 countries in the world have electronic passports? You can use electronic passports when you go in and out of that country. And there are 264 million e-passports generated every year. And actually, that's a number from 2018. So sometimes we can't find stats that are like for this year or last year, but you can imagine that's just only growing. Here in the US, those are global numbers. Here in the US, at least 5 states have implemented a mobile driver's license program. So wouldn't it be great to know that when you get in your car and you go somewhere, you don't have to have that moment of, oh no, do I have my driver's license? Because I don't want to get pulled over and not have that little plastic card, because the next thing you know, they're going to throw you in a jail cell. I'm not sure if they'd really do that. I've never been pulled over and didn't have my driver's license, but it's a fear, right? And anything that creates fear, worry, or extra effort to make sure I've got that driver's license with me, I'm always going to have my phone with me. And the idea that if a cop pulls me over, I can simply show my phone, show my driver's license, show my registration, show my insurance card. This is a tremendous convenience. And by the way, probably possible to be even more legitimate, accurate, provable, if you will, right? Because, cards, things like that can be forged, they can be faked. Whereas if you give someone electronic information that they can immediately verify, then that's much, much less likely to be something that can be forged. So it creates greater security, greater convenience, and once again, saves all this cost. Another study, I'll give you one more stat on this before we move on. Acuity Market Intelligence says that national ID cards around the world, digital ones, our electronic national ID cards are going to reach 3.6 billion in 2021. So it's nearly half the planet is going to have been issued some form of electronic national ID card. Now, we're not seeing this in the United States, so this may not be something that seems like a present thing, but this is a study that looked around the world, and clearly many countries around the world are adopting this. This is an area where here in the United States, I think we're a bit of a laggard. Okay, moving on is credit cards. So again, let's look first around the world, because today a huge percentage of transactions still take place by people using their credit card in one form or another, whether that's swiping it or inserting it or tap to pay. But it's all still using that piece of plastic, or in some cases metal, that you keep in your wallet. But in China, for example, Alipay has more than 1.3 billion users. This is just paying with your phone. There's no card. You're just paying directly with your phone, similar to something like an Apple Pay or a Samsung Pay or a Google Pay, right? But there, it's been so widely adopted. They're doing $17 trillion worth of transactions a year. At least that was in 2020. Could be up in 21 in China on Alipay. And that's not the only form of electronic payment, electronic credit cards, essentially, in China. WeChat Pay, which is the big competitor to Alipay, they're doing more than 800. They have more than 800 million people using that platform, and they're processing more than 1 billion transactions a year. So in other parts of the world, people switching from these physical cards as a way of representing payment to things that happen through the mobile phone has absolutely taken off. Now in the US, it's of course in use, but not as popular. Last year, we had under 100 million, something like 95 million US consumers were using some kind of proximity-based payment, meaning some kind of tap to pay from a mobile phone device. Apple Pay is the number one of those, with 44 million users using it in 2021. Interestingly, number two, can you guess who number two is? It's Starbucks. Starbucks' own payment system has over 31 million users. Can you believe that? And so we see this between them and, of course, other forms of phone-based payments, as I mentioned earlier, Samsung Pay and Google Pay, et cetera. While again, the US is a laggard in this area, I think it's very safe to say that in the next 20 years, we are going to see this be nearly exclusive in terms of how you pay. The idea of walking into a store and handing them a credit card is going to be completely obsolete 20 years from now. It's already obsolete in parts of China. I'll tell you a story. My daughter and I were in Beijing, and this was before the pandemic, 2.5 years ago, I think, something like that. And we were walking around sort of like a touristy area in Beijing, and we wanted to get a snack, and we walked into store after store, and all they would not take cash, they would not take our credit cards, not even American Express. They would only take phone-based payments. And of course, we weren't set up. I had my Apple Pay, but we weren't set up with Alipay and WeChat Pay. So we went hungry. We literally could not buy anything in these stores in China because, we were not set up with those types of payments. And of course, the more that becomes exclusive at stores, the more everyone's going to pretty much have to get it. So another prediction, 80% elimination of plastic and metal credit cards in favor of digital payments. All right, we're almost in the home stretch here. We are in the home stretch, only 2 more. And you can see the trend here now. We're talking about money. Number 19, physical checks. Physical checks. Did you know that since 2013, there were 30 billion checks processed in the United States. By 2017, it was 17.3 billion. We cut nearly 50% of all physical checks out in the 4 years from 2013 to 2017. You know, today, one study says 77% of millennials bank primarily online, and only 8% of all non-cash payments today are made using checks. So checks used to be this enormously popular form of payment. You go to the grocery store, you pay with a check. And today it's still in use, of course, but between things like direct deposit, so we're not sending most people a payroll check, electronic bill payment, as we talked about earlier, the increased use of credit cards and other forms of digital payment in stores, the need to pay by check continues to decline. Furthermore, of course, there's all kinds of additional inconveniences of paying by check. You have to remember to bring a checkbook with you. The merchant then has to deal with getting the check processed, waiting for the check to clear. There's all kinds of pain associated with the world of processing checks. So my prediction is 80% probability that 20 years from now, except perhaps in very rare, I'm guessing Ed McMahon or his successor will still show up at your door with a giant check if you win Publishers Clearinghouse, But other than that, maybe ceremonial checks, things like that. I see really no place for physical checks in our world 20 years from now. And once again, when I say they'd be gone 20 years from now, that means a decline, a continued decline over the next number of years. So expect that and be prepared for the elimination of checks. And so that was number 19 of our top 20 things. And number 20 is in a similar vein from checks, but I'm guessing you might be with me on the elimination of checks. And I'm guessing you might be more aghast at my last prediction, but I'm going to stand by it and I'm going to tell you what it is. My number 20 prediction of things that are going away in the next 20 years is cash. Cash. The Atlanta Fed, Federal Reserve Bank, did a study, and in 2020, only 18% of all payments were done using cash. 18% of all payments. So 82% of all payments made were something other than cash. But here's the part that's most interesting about that. That is down more than half since 2012. In a 6-year period, or actually, I'm sorry, that would be an 8-year period. In an 8-year period, from 2012 to 2020, the use of cash as a means of making payments, according to a study by the government, the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank, there's Federal Reserve Banks all over the country, this is one of them, said that we have halved our use of cash, and that continues to decline. And by the way, it's 18% of all payments. It's only 6% of all value of the payments, because of course we tend to use cash for smaller payments. So it's 18% of all the actual transactions, but only 6% of all the money that actually changed hands. Furthermore, some analysis done by Axios suggests that a significant portion of the remaining use of cash, in other words, when we look at the 18% of those payments that are still using cash, why are they still using cash? Axios suggests that the cash in circulation is primarily used for under-the-table or unlawful activity. Of course, not all, but a large portion of it. So that's why we're not going lower faster, which suggests to me, and we've heard analysis and news reports that suggest that some other countries, and especially China, is considering the elimination of paper currency there, primarily to avoid corruption and to avoid crime, or at least reduce crime. It's harder to engage in criminal activities if you don't have physical cash. So we have already a decline in the use of cash. We have a knowledge that now some of the remaining people that are using cash are using it for various criminal purposes, whether it's tax evasion or drug trafficking or whatever it may be. So there's a reason that governmental entities might have an interest in looking at the idea of eliminating cash. Not to mention, cash is expensive, and I don't mean that it's expensive to go get $10,000 of cash out of the bank because it costs $10,000. I mean that printing the cash costs money and managing it. One study by IHL, which is a restaurant organization, says that the cost of cash is over 10% of the transaction cost in the food and beverage industry. In other words, the cost that the restaurant has to bear to receive the cash, count the cash, deposit the cash, make sure they have the right cash to make change, the time they have to, the whole issue of dealing with cash creates cost for every business in this country that deals with cash. So removing that cost from the businesses presumably is good for the business, good for the consumer. You're reducing cost, potentially either lower prices or higher profit for the business. And furthermore, of course, it's a hassle to have to walk around, make sure you have cash on you, have to worry about where there's an ATM. So there's all kinds of pain for consumers dealing with cash. And lastly, and we're more conscious of this than previously during coronavirus, cash is a carrier of germs. Ask any mother how they would feel if their kid takes a quarter and puts it in their mouth, or a dollar and licks it, right? Cash is risky from a disease transmission perspective. It's not the only thing, but eliminating physical cash and going to more contactless forms of payment is yet one more way to benefit from a public health perspective. So look at all those reasons why cash is, well, bad. And the fact that people are already moving away from it with the adoption of all these digital forms of payment. My prediction is 20 years from now, this ratio of use of cash to other things, the decline of cash, this is already occurring, is going to continue, and cash is going to be less and less mainstream. And you won't have to worry about leaving the house with cash in your pocket, because pretty nearly everybody will be taking digital payments. And so that's number 20. And if you look at it all together, I'm going to make one bonus prediction. This isn't really, I have no stats to support this, but I'm guessing the elimination of the wallet. So if you're in the leather industry, or what else do they make wallets out of, right? Vinyl and whatever. I don't see why anyone's going to need a wallet anymore. What did you keep in the wallet before? You kept your credit cards? Gone. You kept your cash? Gone. You kept your driver's license? Gone. You kept your insurance card? Gone. You kept the photos of your kids. Those are on your phone, right? So my prediction is we won't have that. What was it they talked about on Seinfeld? The bulge. You remember George had his wallet with all the stuff in it? No more. We can all walk around and walk nice and straight without having to worry, for men anyway, about a big bulge in one of our pockets where we have a wallet. One less thing for women to have to carry in their purse. Oh, so women's wallets often contain the checkbook, right? So that's another thing. Men's wallets, of course, go in the pocket. You never put a checkbook in there. That's another thing that's gone. So if you remove all of those things, I got nothing left in my wallet. I don't need to carry this thing around with me either. So if you're in the wallet industry, you need to be paying attention to what's going on with checks and credit cards and photos, because the need for your wallet is reducing, just like the reduction of physical books is likely to reduce the need for bookcases in our homes. The move towards the electronic office reduces the need for file cabinets. So anyway, hopefully you found this interesting. Hopefully you violently disagree with me about something, because I would love to hear from you. These are my predictions. As you see, they are based on a combination of research, statistics, and also my own experience and having tracked digital transformation over 25 years in my teams. Having said that, we are not perfect. We are not flawless. Just like the weatherman, we can get it wrong. But nevertheless, I think the elimination of these 20 things is likely enough that if I were you, I'd be planning for it. Scenario planning, right? Maybe things will go another way in some of these, a few of these. Some of these could turn around and come back. Anything's possible. But this is the likely probability, and therefore you should be thinking about a business over the next 10 to 20 years that eliminates these things and making sure you're preparing for that future. Hopefully this has been fun and interesting for us to go through together. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening to the Winning Digital Customers Show, and see you next time. And until then, keep transforming.